They say love is blind, but in Brandon's case, it was just plain stupid. He thought his pregnant wife, Vivian, was nothing more than a burden, a woman whose waistline was expanding while his patience was shrinking. He dragged his mistress into their home, mocked his wife's swollen ankles, and laughed when she couldn't fit into her old designer dresses. He thought he held all the cards. He thought he was the king of the castle, but he forgot one tiny detail: kings can be dethroned. And when the judge finally opened the sealed envelope in court and addressed the trembling housewife as Madam CEO, the look on Brandon's face wasn't just fear. It was the end of his entire world. You won't believe how this ends. The chandelier in the grand dining room of the fictional, yet all too realistic Kensington Heights estate cast a harsh, glittering light over the table. It was supposed to be a celebration of Brandon's promotion to Regional Director of Nexcore Solutions, a mid-level logistics firm that had recently seen a massive influx of capital. But for Vivian, heavily pregnant and swollen with water retention, it felt more like an execution. Vivian adjusted her maternity dress, a modest navy blue piece that she had bought off the rack. It was a stark contrast to the shimmering silver-sequined gown worn by the woman sitting directly across from her. Her name was Chloe. She was 24, sharp-featured, and currently swirling a glass of 1996 vintage Merlot that Vivian had been saving for her 5th wedding anniversary. "Babe, this wine is actually decent," Chloe said, smacking her lips theatrically. She didn't look at Vivian. She looked only at Brandon, who sat at the head of the table, basking in the adoration of his mistress and the subservience of his wife. Brandon chuckled, loosening his tie. "I told you, Chloe, I only keep the best in the cellar, even if the company at the table isn't exactly top tier anymore." He cast a sideways glance at Vivian. She was struggling to cut her steak, her hands trembling slightly from the fatigue that had plagued her 3rd trimester. "Brandon," Vivian said softly, her voice steady, despite the humiliation burning her cheeks. "Please, not tonight. You invited your colleagues. They'll be here in 20 minutes. And," Brandon snapped, slamming his fork down. The sound echoed off the marble walls. "Let them come. Let them see the reality of my life. I'm a man on the rise, Vivian. I'm the face of Nexcore. And look at you." He gestured vaguely at her stomach, his face twisted in a sneer. "You're huge, Viv. You waddle when you walk. It's embarrassing. I need someone on my arm who represents success, energy, vitality." He reached out and squeezed Chloe's hand. Like Chloe. Chloe giggled a sharp, grating sound. "Oh, stop it, Bran. You're making her cry." She didn't sound sorry. She sounded delighted. Vivian set her knife down. She looked at the man she had married 5 years ago. He had been ambitious then, but kind. Or so she thought. Success, or the illusion of it, had peeled back his skin to reveal the rot underneath. "I am carrying your daughter Brandon," Vivian said, her eyes dry. She had cried enough tears in the guest bedroom over the last 6 months. "I am your wife." "Only on paper," Brandon scoffed. "And honestly, I'm thinking of changing that soon. Once the baby is out, we'll talk lawyers. But for now, you play the part. When the partners arrive, you go to the kitchen. Chloe will host with me." The air left the room. "You want me to stay in the kitchen?" Vivian asked. "You're good at cooking, aren't you? Stick to what you know. Leave the business talk and the socializing to the adults," Brandon said, taking a sip of his wine. "Besides, nobody wants to look at a whale while they're trying to close a deal." Chloe covered her mouth to hide a smirk. I can handle the guests, Viv. Don't worry. You just make sure the hors d'oeuvres stay warm. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Brandon shot up, adjusting his suit jacket. Showtime, Chloe. You ready? Born ready, she purred, linking her arm through his. Brandon looked down at his wife one last time. Kitchen, now. And don't come out unless we need more ice. Vivian sat frozen for a moment as they walked toward the foyer. To greet the guests, senior partners from the firm men, Brandon was desperate to impress. She listened to his booming, charming laugh, so different from the venom he spewed at her. She placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump against her palm. Okay, Vivian whispered to the empty room. He wants business. We'll give him business. She didn't go to the kitchen. Instead, she slowly stood up, walked to the grand staircase, and ascended to the master bedroom. She went to the back of her closet, past the maternity clothes, to a locked safe, hidden behind a row of winter coats. She dialed a combination 0409. The date they met. A date he had likely forgotten. Inside the safe wasn't jewelry or cash. It was a single thick manila envelope stamped with the logo of a massive international conglomerate, Ethelgard Holdings. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in 8 months. Arthur, she said when the line connected. Madam. The voice on the other end was crisp, elderly, and respectful. We didn't expect to hear from you until after the maternity leave. Plans have changed, Vivian said, her voice turning cold as steel. I need you to prepare the acquisition files for Next Core Solutions, and Arthur contact Judge Harrington. Tell him I'm finally ready to file. To understand the magnitude of Brandon's mistake, you have to understand who Vivian actually was. Brandon knew her as Vivian Miller, the quiet graphic design freelancer he met at a coffee shop 5 years ago. He knew she had a modest savings account and no family to speak of. He liked that. He liked that she was low maintenance. It made him feel like the provider, the savior. What Brandon didn't know because he never asked, and because he was too self-absorbed to do a background check on his own wife, was that Miller was the anglicized version of her mother's maiden name. Her father was Thomas Ethelgard, the reclusive billionaire behind Ethelgard Holdings, a venture capital firm that owned half the logistics infrastructure in the Northern Hemisphere. When Thomas passed away 3 years into their marriage, Vivian inherited everything. She hadn't told Brandon. Not at first because she was grieving, and later because she saw the way he talked about money. He worshipped it. He craved it. She wanted to know if he loved her, or if he would only love her net worth. She had her answer now. Downstairs, the party was in full swing. Brandon was holding court in the living room, a scotch in one hand, Chloe on his arm. It's all about leverage, Brandon was saying loudly to Mr. Henderson, a senior partner at Next Core. You have to know when to squeeze the market. That's how I doubled our regional output this quarter. Mr. Henderson, a grey-haired man with a skeptical expression, nodded slowly. Impressive numbers, Brandon. But rumors are the parent company is looking to restructure. Ethelgard Holdings is sending a representative next week. Brandon waved a hand dismissively. Ethelgard, they're sleeping giants. They won't touch us. I'm practically running this ship anyway. Whoever they send will just rubber stamp my strategies. Chloe chimed in, leaning against him. Brandon is a genius. He basically built this branch from the ground up. Is that so? Henderson asked, raising an eyebrow. I thought the strategy came from the anonymous consultant the board hired last year. Brandon stiffened. He had taken credit for those strategies. Strategies Vivian had quietly written up for him late at night, claiming she read it in a book just to help him out. I refined the consultant's work, Brandon stammered. Made it actionable. Upstairs, Vivian was packing a bag. Not a suitcase, just a go bag. She wasn't leaving the house. That would be legally unwise. She was preparing for war. She changed out of the navy dress. She couldn't wear her power suits yet. Her pregnancy prevented that. But she put on a black silk robe that cost more than Brandon's car. She slicked her hair back. She applied red lipstick, sharp and precise. She walked out of the bedroom and stood at the top of the stairs, listening to the lies her husband was spinning below. "Where is your wife, Brandon?" another guest, Mrs. Gable, asked. "I haven't seen her." "Oh, Vivian isn't feeling well," Brandon lied smoothly. "Pregnancy hormones. She's very emotional. Best to let her rest." "Actually," a voice rang out from the top of the stairs, clear and projecting perfectly. "I'm feeling better than I have in years." The conversation in the living room died instantly. Every head turned upward. Vivian descended the stairs. She didn't hold the railing. She walked with a regal grace that seemed to defy her physical condition. The silk robe flowed around her like water. She didn't look like the waddling whale Brandon had described. She looked like a queen approaching her court. Brandon's jaw dropped. "Vivian, I told you to stay in the—" "You told me to stay in the kitchen," Vivian interrupted, reaching the bottom step. She walked right past him, ignoring Chloe entirely, and extended a hand to Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson," she said. "It's a pleasure to finally put a face to the name. I believe you've been emailing my office regarding the Q3 restructuring." Mr. Henderson looked confused. He took her hand hesitantly. Mrs. Miller. "I'm sorry I don't recall emailing you." "Not me." Vivian smiled a dangerous, shark-like smile. "You've been emailing the office of the chairman at Ethelgard Holdings." Brandon stepped forward, his face turning red. "Vivian, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. She's delusional," he said to the guests, laughing nervously. "It's the preeclampsia or something. She thinks she's involved in the business." "Brandon," Vivian said, her voice dropping an octave. "Shut up." The silence that followed was deafening. Brandon looked as if he had been slapped. "I'm sorry to interrupt your party," Vivian said, addressing the room. "But since my husband decided to bring his mistress into our matrimonial home and introduce her as his partner, I felt it was only fair to introduce myself properly." She turned to Brandon. "You want a divorce, Brandon? You want to be with Chloe because she represents success?" Brandon stared at her, unable to form words. "You'll get your wish," Vivian said. "But be very careful what you ask for in the settlement, because unlike you, I don't play with fake money." She turned back to the stairs. "Mr. Henderson, check your inbox at 900 a.m. tomorrow. You'll have the restructuring orders. And Brandon, you can sleep in the guest room. Chloe, you can leave." "Now wait a minute," Chloe shrieked, stepping forward. "You can't talk to us like that in Brandon's house." Vivian stopped on the third step. She didn't turn around. "Check the deed, Chloe. It's not Brandon's house. It never was." She continued up the stairs, leaving a room full of stunned executives and a husband whose facade was beginning to crack. The next morning, the atmosphere in the house was toxic. Brandon had slept in the guest room, but he was up early, storming around the kitchen, slamming cabinet doors. When Vivian came down for tea wearing comfortable maternity leggings and an oversized sweater, Brandon cornered her. "What the hell was that last night?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea how much damage control I had to do after you went upstairs. Henderson thinks you're insane. Vivian calmly placed a tea bag in her mug. Did he say that? Or are you projecting? He thinks you're having a breakdown, claiming to know the chairman of Ethelgard. Brandon laughed a cruel barking sound. You design logos for bake sales, Viv. You don't run conglomerates. If you say so, she said, pouring hot water. I'm done, Brandon said, slapping a folder onto the counter. I had my lawyer draft these up this morning. Emergency filing. I want you out. I'm keeping the house. You can have the minivan. And I'm filing for full custody. Vivian looked at the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Full custody, she repeated softly. On what grounds? Mental instability, Brandon sneered. Your little performance last night proves it. Plus, I can provide for the child. You have no income, no job, no future. Vivian picked up the papers. She didn't tear them up. She didn't throw them. She simply nodded. Okay, she said. Brandon blinked. Okay, you're agreeing. I'll see you in court, Brandon. He looked disappointed. He wanted a fight. He wanted to see her beg. Her calm acceptance unnerved him. You better get a lawyer, he warned. A cheap one. It's all you can afford. 2 weeks later, the preliminary hearing was set. Brandon arrived at the courthouse in his leased Porsche, wearing his best Italian suit. Chloe was with him, wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously like a wedding gown, clinging to his arm like a trophy. Don't worry, babe, Brandon told her as they walked up the steps. She'll probably show up with some public defender. We'll crush her in 20 minutes. Then we go to lunch to celebrate. They entered the courtroom. It was a family court, usually reserved for sad, quiet disputes. But today the air felt different. Brandon's lawyer, a strip mall attorney named Greg, was already organizing his files. She's not here yet, Greg said, checking his watch. If she's 15 minutes late, we win by default. She's probably taking the bus, Chloe giggled. Just then the double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. It wasn't Vivian who walked in first. It was a man in a charcoal grey suit carrying a leather briefcase that cost more than Brandon's annual salary. Then another man. Then a woman. A team of 5 lawyers marched down the aisle, moving in a phalanx of legal power. They set up at the defense table, unpacking laptops and thick binders. Brandon frowned. Who are they? Greg. His lawyer went pale. That's the senior litigation team from Sterling and Cromwell. Is that good? Brandon asked. Good, Brandon, they represent Fortune 500 companies. They don't do divorces. Their hourly rate is $5,000. Then Vivian entered. She wore a custom-tailored maternity suit in charcoal grey. Her hair was immaculate. She didn't look at Brandon. She sat down in the center of the phalanx of lawyers, looking calm and bored. All rise, the bailiff shouted. The Honourable Judge Harrington presiding. Judge Harrington was a stern man, with a reputation for zero tolerance for nonsense. He took his seat and adjusted his glasses. He looked at the docket. Case number 4492. Brandon versus Vivian, the judge read. He looked up. I see we have quite the audience today. He looked at Brandon's lawyer. Mr. Greg, you represent the petitioner. Yes, Your Honor, Greg squeaked. And? The judge looked at the defense table, his eyebrows shooting up. Mr. Arthur Pendleton. I wasn't aware you practiced family law. The lead lawyer, the elderly man Vivian had spoken to on the phone, stood up. I don't typically, Your Honor, Arthur said, his voice smooth and commanding. However, given the complex nature of the assets involved and the specific accusations of fraud leveled against the petitioner, My client requested my personal attention. Fraud! Brandon shouted, standing up. I didn't commit fraud. She's the one lying. Sit down, Judge Harrington barked. Arthur smiled thinly. We are not accusing you of fraud against the marriage, Mr. Brandon. We are countersuing for corporate espionage, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty against Ethelgard Holdings. Brandon looked confused. What does that have to do with my divorce? Everything. Vivian spoke for the first time. She didn't stand up. She just leaned into the microphone. Because you filed for divorce claiming you are the primary provider. Today we are going to prove that every cent you earned was actually stolen from me. The judge leaned forward. Counsel, explain. Arthur opened a file. Your Honor, the petitioner, Mr. Brandon is employed by Nexcore Solutions. Nexcore is a wholly owned subsidiary of Ethelgard Holdings. The majority shareholder of Ethelgard Holdings is the respondent Vivian Ethelgard Miller. The courtroom went silent. Brandon's face went slack. He turned to look at Vivian. You, he whispered. You own my company. I own the company that owns your company, Vivian corrected. And Brandon's, we've been auditing your expense reports for the last 6 months. The dinners with Chloe, the hotels, the client gifts. You charged them all to the corporate card. She smiled, and for the first time it looked like she was enjoying herself. You didn't just cheat on your wife, Brandon. You stole from your boss. The silence in courtroom 4B was absolute. Even the stenographer had stopped typing her fingers, hovering over the keys, eyes wide, as she looked from the trembling husband to the stone-faced wife. Order, Judge Harrington finally said, though he didn't bang his gavel. He seemed too fascinated by the turn of events to make noise. Mr. Gregg, are you aware of your client's employment relationship with the respondent? Greg Brandon's strip mall lawyer looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. He was sweating profusely, loosening his cheap tie. Your Honor, I was told Mr. Brandon was a high-ranking executive. I was not informed that his wife signed his paychecks. I do not sign his paychecks, Vivian interrupted calmly. My payroll department does. I have never interfered with Brandon's career. In fact, I ensured that no one at Nexcore knew we were married precisely so he could succeed on his own merit. She turned her gaze to Brandon. And for 5 years I watched you climb the ladder. I was proud of you, until I realized that the higher you climbed, the smaller you became. Brandon gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. The reality was crashing down on him, but his ego wouldn't let him accept it. Not yet. This is a lie, Brandon shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. It's a trick. She's a graphic designer. We live in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, not a mansion. If she's a billionaire, why does she drive a Honda? Arthur Vivian's lead attorney stood up slowly. He adjusted his cufflinks. If I may, Your Honor, I would like to introduce Exhibit C. He walked over to the bailiff and handed him a thick stack of documents bound in red tape. These are the incorporation papers of Ethelgard Holdings, Arthur explained. As you can see, the controlling interest passed to Vivian Ethelgard upon the death of her father Thomas Ethelgard 3 years ago. The trust is irrevocable. Arthur turned to the gallery, then back to Brandon. As for the Honda, Mrs. Ethelgard Miller prefers modesty. She believes that wealth screams, but wealth whispers. A concept you clearly struggle with, Mr. Brandon, given that you leased a Porsche 911 on the company dime 3 days after your promotion. Objection, Greg squeaked. Relevance. The relevance, Judge Harrington said, his voice dripping with ice, is that this is a divorce hearing centered on financial assets. If the petitioner has been funding his lifestyle through embezzlement, that is highly relevant to the division of property. The judge turned to Arthur. Continue. Arthur projected an image onto the courtroom screen. It was a spreadsheet, a forensic accounting of Brandon's corporate credit card. Here we have a charge for $4,500 at the Sapphire Lounge, Arthur read. Labeled as Client Entertainment. The date corresponds to Mrs. Ethelgard Miller's birthday. Brandon, you told your wife you were working late that night. In reality, you were buying champagne for Miss Chloe Dasher. The courtroom turned to look at Chloe. She shrank into her seat, pulling her white dress tighter around her. And here, Arthur continued, clicking a button, a charge for $12,000 at Van Cleef & Arpels, a diamond necklace, labeled as office supplies. A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Office supplies, the judge asked, raising an eyebrow. That must be a very impressive stapler. Brandon stammered. I can explain. It was a gift. For a potential investor. Really? Arthur smiled. Because Miss Chloe Dasher is wearing that exact necklace right now. All eyes snapped to Chloe's neck. She gasped instinctively, covering the diamond pendant with her hand. But it was too late. The bailiff stepped forward. That is stolen company property, Arthur said coldly. We will be requiring that back before you leave the building. Brandon slammed his fist on the table. Stop it! You're twisting everything I made, that company money I brought in the Johnson account. I increased revenue by 15%. Vivian stood up. She didn't ask for permission. The force of her presence silenced him. You brought in the Johnson account, she said, her voice steady. Because I played golf with Peter Johnson's wife 3 weeks prior and told her to give you a chance. You increased revenue because I approved a budget surplus for your department that no other regional director got. She walked toward the witness stand, though she hadn't been sworn in yet. She stood in the center of the well, looking at the man she had loved. I built the road you walked on, Brandon. I smoothed out every pothole. I cleared every obstacle. All I wanted was for you to feel like a king. I wanted you to feel strong. Her voice cracked just for a second. And how did you repay me? You mocked me. You called me fat. You brought another woman into the home I paid for. Yes, Brandon, I paid off the mortgage 2 years ago. I just didn't tell you so you'd feel like the provider paying the monthly installments. Brandon looked like he was going to be sick. The mortgage is paid off. The bank transfers went into a savings account for our child, Vivian said. You haven't paid a dime toward the house in years. You've been paying into a trust fund for the daughter you called a burden. The judge leaned back, looking disgusted. Mr. Gregg, do you have any defense for your client, or should we move straight to sentencing? Gregg stood up, gathering his papers. Your Honor, I request a recess. I need to consult with my client regarding his, exposure. Denied, Judge Harrington said. We are finishing this today. Put the mistress on the stand. Chloe Dasher had always prided herself on being the winner. She was younger than Vivian Fitter, more willing to laugh at Brandon's bad jokes. She saw Brandon as her ticket to the good life, a VP with a Porsche and a future. Now as she walked to the witness stand, her high heels clicking loudly on the wooden floor, she felt like a lamb being led to a slaughterhouse. She sat down, adjusting the microphone. She refused to look at Vivian. State your name for the record, the bailiff said. Chloe Dasher, she whispered. Arthur didn't stay at his desk. He walked right up to the stand, leaning against the railing. He looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. "Miss Dasher," Arthur began, his voice deceptively polite. "How long have you been in a relationship with the petitioner?" "Mr. Brandon, about 8 months," Chloe said, her voice shaking. "And were you aware that he was married?" "Yes, but he told me it was over. He said she was emotionally unavailable. He said they were just roommates." "I see," Arthur said. "And did Mr. Brandon tell you that he was paying for your apartment?" Chloe blinked. "Excuse me, your apartment at the Marina Towers. Rent is $3,200 a month. Mr. Brandon has been paying it." He helps me out," Chloe said defensively. "He's generous." "He pays it with a NextCore corporate check," Arthur corrected. "Which means, Miss Dasher, that my client, Mrs. Vivian Ethelgard Miller, has been paying your rent." Vivian let out a short, cold laugh from the defense table. Chloe's face turned bright red. "I didn't know," Chloe cried. "He told me it was his bonus money." "Ignorance is not a defense for receiving stolen property," Arthur said. "But let's talk about the dinner party, the night you entered Mrs. Ethelgard Miller's home." "Brandon invited me," Chloe blurted out, looking frantically at Brandon. "He said he wanted to show me off. He said Vivian was a frump, that she needed to know her place." "And you enjoyed that, didn't you?" Arthur asked, his voice hardening. "You enjoyed drinking the wine from her cellar. You enjoyed mocking a pregnant woman in her own dining room." Chloe stammered. "I was just supporting my boyfriend." "Your boyfriend," Arthur repeated. He turned to Brandon. "Mr. Brandon, is Miss Dasher your girlfriend? Or is she, as you described in an email to your college buddy last week, just a bit of fun until something better comes along?" The courtroom gasped. Chloe's head snapped toward Brandon. "What?" Brandon stood up, panic in his eyes. "I never said that." "That's out of context." Arthur held up a piece of paper. Date November 14th. Subject the new girl. Text: "Chloe is great for the ego, but she's not exactly CEO material. Once the divorce settles, I'll probably upgrade. Maybe find someone with a trust fund." The irony hung in the air like thick smoke. He wanted a trust fund while he was divorcing a billionaire. Chloe's expression shifted from fear to pure, unadulterated rage. She looked at the man she had helped humiliate his wife for, the man she thought was her prize. "You said you loved me," Chloe hissed at Brandon across the courtroom. "You said I was the love of your life." "I said what I had to say," Brandon shouted back, his facade cracking completely. "You were expensive, Chloe. Do you know how much maintenance you require? The bags, the shoes, the constant whining for attention. I did it to blow off steam because my wife was too busy being tired and pregnant." "Excuse me." Vivian stood up again. "I was tired because I was running a multinational conglomerate while carrying your child, Brandon. You were tired because you were up all night texting her." "You used me," Chloe screamed at Brandon, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "I helped you lie. I helped you hide the bank statements. I even told you to transfer the savings account before the court date." The courtroom went dead silent. Even Brandon's lawyer, Greg, face-palmed. Arthur smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who just watched the prey walk into the trap. "I'm sorry," Arthur said softly. "Did you just confess to conspiracy to commit asset concealment?" Chloe froze. Her eyes went wide. She realized what she had just done. "No, I didn't mean—" "Miss Dasher," Judge Harrington boomed. "You are under oath. Did you knowingly assist Mr. Brandon in hiding assets from this court?" Chloe looked at Brandon. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. He had already thrown her under the bus in his email. He wasn't going to save her. She hardened her heart. If she was going down, she was taking him with her. "Yes," Chloe said, her voice clear. "He made me do it. He told me that if we didn't hide the money, Vivian would take it all. He transferred $50,000 into my personal account last Tuesday. He told me to hold it until the divorce was final." "That's a lie," Brandon screamed. "She stole it. She's a thief." "I have the text messages," Chloe shouted back, pulling a phone out of her bra. "It's all right here, transferring the $50K now. Don't spend it yet. We need it for the yacht trip once the whale is gone." "The whale," Vivian repeated, her voice cutting through the shouting match. She looked at Brandon with pity, not anger. "That's what you called me." Brandon looked at his wife. For the first time, he saw the power she held. He saw the army of lawyers. He saw the judge who looked ready to sign an arrest warrant. And he saw Chloe, the mistress he had flaunted, now waving his incriminating texts in the air. He collapsed into his chair, burying his head in his hands. "I want my necklace back," Vivian said calmly. Arthur walked over to Chloe. He held out his hand. Chloe, sobbing, undid the clasp of the diamond necklace. She dropped it into Arthur's palm. "And the dress?" Vivian added. Chloe looked up, horrified. "What? That dress?" Vivian said, pointing. "Prada Spring Collection. Charged to the corporate card on October 2nd. It's company property. You can return it to the bailiff in the holding cell." "Holding cell!" Chloe shrieked. Judge Harrington banged his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. "Miss Dasher, you are to be remanded into custody pending a full investigation into your involvement in the embezzlement of NextCorp funds. Bailiff, take her away." Two officers stepped forward. Chloe screamed as they grabbed her arms. "Brandon, help me, Brandon!" Brandon didn't look up. He was watching his life dissolve. "And as for you, Mr. Brandon," Judge Harrington said, his eyes narrowing, "I suggest you get comfortable. We haven't even gotten to the custody arrangement yet." Vivian sat back down. She placed a hand on her stomach. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "Mommy is just taking out the trash." With Chloe dragged out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the atmosphere shifted from chaotic drama to a cold, clinical execution. The silence that settled over the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of Brandon's ragged breathing. He sat alone at the defendant's table. His lawyer, Greg, had physically moved his chair a few inches away from Brandon, clearly distancing himself from the sinking ship. Judge Harrington turned his gaze back to Brandon. The amusement was gone from the judge's eyes. Now there was only disdain. "Mr. Brandon," the judge said, his voice low and dangerous, "we have established that you have funded your lifestyle through misappropriated funds. We have established that you have committed adultery. We have established that you attempted to hide assets. Now let us discuss the matter of custody." Brandon shot up, desperation clawing at his throat. This was his last card, the only leverage he thought he had left. "I love my child," Brandon cried out, his voice cracking. "You can't take my baby away. I made mistakes, yes. I'm flawed. But I'm a father. I have a right to be in my child's life. Vivian can't raise a kid alone. She's a workaholic. She runs a conglomerate, you heard her. She'll never be home." Vivian stood up slowly. She signaled Arthur to sit down. She didn't need a lawyer for this part. She needed to speak as a mother. "Your Honor," Vivian said, her voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the room. "Brandon calls me a workaholic. Yet in the last 5 years, Who cooked every meal? Me. Who remembered every birthday? Me. Who managed the household, scheduled the appointments, and prepared the nursery? Me. She walked closer to Brandon, looking him dead in the eye. You say I'm too busy running a company. Brandon, I own the company. That means I set the hours. I have built a nursery in my office. I have a team of assistants who handle the paperwork, so I can spend my time being a mother. I designed my life specifically, so I could have it all. She took a breath, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. But you viewed this pregnancy as an inconvenience. You told your friends I was losing my figure. You told your mistress you wanted a divorce the moment the baby was born. You didn't want a child, Brandon. You wanted an heir to a fortune you thought you were building. Well, the fortune is mine. And the child, she is mine too. Brandon slumped back. She, he whispered. It's a girl. Yes, Vivian said coldly. Something you would know if you had bothered to come to the 20-week ultrasound instead of going to a golf tournament with Chloe. The judge made a note on his pad, shaking his head. The court finds, Judge Harrington announced, that it is in the best interest of the child to grant sole legal and physical custody to the mother Vivian Ethelgard Miller. The father, Mr. Brandon, is granted supervised visitation rights only. Supervised? Brandon gasped. Like a criminal. Given your erratic behavior, your financial instability, and your questionable moral character, yes, the judge snapped, you will see your daughter 2 hours a week in a state-approved facility under the watch of a social worker. And that is only if you pass a weekly drug and alcohol screening. Brandon looked at his hands. He was shaking. But I can't afford that. The facility fees. Get a job, the judge said simply. Now, the judge continued, on to the division of assets. Mr. Arthur. Arthur stood up, adjusting his glasses. Thank you, Your Honor. Since all marital assets were purchased with funds embezzled from Ethelgard Holdings, we petition that the house, the cars, and all contents be returned to the plaintiff. Furthermore, we are suing Mr. Brandon for the return of the $480,000 he misappropriated over the last 3 years, plus legal fees. Granted, the judge said, banging the gavel. Brandon's eyes bulged. $400,000, I don't have that kind of money. I'm broke. You just fired me. Then I suggest you declare bankruptcy, Arthur said cheerfully. Although keep in mind, debt incurred through fraud is not dischargeable in bankruptcy court. You will owe Mrs. Ethelgard Miller for the rest of your life. Brandon turned to Vivian. He fell to his knees right there on the courtroom floor. The arrogance was gone. The pride was dust. Vivian, please, he sobbed, reaching out for her hem. Don't do this. I'm your husband. We had good times, didn't we? Remember our honeymoon. Remember when we met. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was stupid. I was weak. Take me back. Please, just take me back. I'll change. I'll be the husband you want. Vivian looked down at him. She didn't see a monster anymore. She saw a pathetic small man who had built a castle on sand. She remembered the nights she cried herself to sleep while he was with Chloe. She remembered the way he laughed when she struggled to put on her shoes. She remembered the name, Whale. You're right, Brandon, she said quietly. We did have good times, but those times were based on a lie. You loved the idea of me being small so you could feel big. And now that you know I'm bigger than you ever imagined, you don't love me. You just fear me. She stepped back out of his reach. I don't hate you, Brandon. I just don't need you. You were a bad investment. And today, I'm liquidating my losses. She turned to her lawyers. "Let's go." "Case closed," the bailiff shouted. As Vivian walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by her high-powered legal team, she didn't look back. Behind her, Brandon remained on his knees, weeping into the carpet of a courtroom that had just stripped him of everything: his job, his home, his money, and his family. 1 year later. The city didn't look the same from the window of a bus as it did from the driver's seat of a Porsche. Winter had settled hard over the city, turning the streets into a slushy grey mess that seeped into the holes of Brandon's worn-out shoes. He sat near the back of the number 42 bus, his forehead resting against the cold glass, watching the skyline drift by. In his former life, he worked in one of those gleaming towers. He used to look down on the ants scurrying below. Now he was one of them. Brandon checked his watch, a cheap digital replacement for the Rolex he had been forced to liquidate. He was late for his shift. He worked at Tony's Diner, a cramped, grease-stained establishment 5 miles from the grandeur of the Kensington Heights estate he used to call home. His title was server, but in reality he was a busboy, a cleaner, and a punching bag for dissatisfied customers. He pushed open the diner door, the bell jingling cheerfully, a sound he had grown to hate. "You're late, Bran," the manager, a thick-necked man named Carl, barked from the pass-through window. "Table 6 needs wiping. And stop dragging your feet. You look like a zombie." "Sorry, Carl," Brandon muttered, tying his stained apron around his waist. "Bus was slow. Bus is always slow. Get a car or get a new excuse." Brandon grabbed a rag and a bottle of spray. A car. He almost laughed. His wages were garnished so aggressively that he barely had enough left over for rent on his studio apartment. A damp room above a bowling alley that smelled perpetually of stale beer and floor wax. 50% of every paycheck went directly to Ethelgard Holdings. At the current rate of repayment, Arthur Vivian's lawyer had politely informed him that he would be debt-free by the time he was 74. As Brandon wiped down table 6, scrubbing at a stubborn coffee stain, his eyes drifted to a discarded magazine left on the booth seat. It was the latest issue of Fortune. His heart stopped. There, glossy and high definition, was Vivian. She looked breathtaking. She was wearing a white power suit that accentuated her strength, not just her figure. Her hair was cut into a sharp, chic bob, and her smile wasn't the timid, apologetic smile she used to give him when dinner was 5 minutes late. It was a smile of absolute victory. Perched on her hip was a baby girl with bright, intelligent eyes. His daughter. The headline screamed in bold gold letters, "The Mother of Invention." How Vivian Ethelgard revolutionized logistics while raising the next generation. Brandon's hands trembled. He reached out his rough, chapped fingers, hovering over the glossy paper. He remembered when he used to tell her she was boring. He remembered telling her she had no ambition. "Hey, buddy, you done staring at the trash?" Brandon jumped. A customer, a man in a sharp suit that reminded Brandon painfully of his own past wardrobe, was sliding into the booth. "Sorry," Brandon stammered, grabbing the magazine. "I was just looking." "Hell of a woman, right?" the customer said with a smirk, nodding at the cover. "I read the article on the plane. She took a mid-level firm and tripled its stock value in 8 months. And she's single. Imagine being the guy who let her go." The words hit Brandon like a physical blow to the gut. The air left his lungs. "Yeah," Brandon whispered, his voice raspy. "Imagine. Guy must be the biggest idiot on the planet." The customer laughed, oblivious to the way Brandon's face drained of color. Probably cries himself to sleep on a futon somewhere. Anyway, get me a coffee. Black. Brandon retreated to the kitchen, clutching the magazine to his chest like a shield. He didn't cry. He didn't have the energy left to cry. He just felt the hollow, aching void where his arrogance used to be. Six hours later, Brandon clocked out. He washed the grease off his hands in the employee sink scrubbing until his skin was raw, trying to feel clean enough for what came next. It was Tuesday, visitation day. He took 2 more buses to the State Department of Family Services. The building was a depressing block of concrete that smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. He checked in at the front desk, emptied his pockets for the metal detector, and was buzzed through a heavy steel door. "Room B," the receptionist said without looking up. Room B was a sterile square with fluorescent lights that hummed loudly. There was a plastic table, 2 plastic chairs, and a box of donated toys in the corner. A social worker sat in the corner with a clipboard watching him like a hawk. "She'll be here in a minute," the social worker said. "Remember the rules, Mr. Brandon. No questions about the mother's personal life. No negative talk. And if I smell alcohol, the visit is over." "I'm sober," Brandon said quietly. He sat down, his hands clasped between his knees, waiting. The door opened, and a nanny walked in. She was carrying a 1-year-old girl, dressed in a soft pink coat and tiny leather boots that probably cost more than Brandon's rent. "Hi," Brandon breathed, standing up. "Hi, sweetie." The baby looked at him. There was no recognition in her eyes. To her, this man was just a recurring feature of the grey room, like the plastic chairs or the humming lights. She didn't smile. She didn't reach for him. She clung to the nanny's neck, burying her face. "She's a little tired today," the nanny said apologetically, handing the child over. Brandon took his daughter into his arms. She felt heavy, solid, a real human life that he had helped create but had no part in shaping. She smelled of lavender and expensive baby powder. "It's me," Brandon whispered, rocking her awkwardly. It's Dada." The baby squirmed. She looked up at him, her lower lip trembling. Then she started to cry. It wasn't a tantrum. It was the cry of a child who wanted comfort and didn't find it in the arms holding her. Brandon tried to shush her, tried to bounce her, but the crying only got louder. The social worker made a note on her clipboard. Failure to soothe. "I don't know what she wants." Brandon panicked, looking at the nanny. "I don't know what to do." "She wants her mother," a voice said from the doorway. Brandon froze. The crying stopped instantly as the baby turned her head, her face lighting up with pure, unadulterated joy. She reached her chubby arms out toward the door. "Mama!" she squealed. Vivian stood there. She was wearing a camel-colored cashmere coat over a charcoal business dress. She looked regal, untouched by the grime of the city, radiating a calm authority that filled the small room. She didn't look angry. She didn't look vindictive. She just looked complete. "Time's up, Brandon," the social worker announced, checking her watch. "That's 2 hours." Vivian stepped forward. She didn't acknowledge Brandon at first. She focused entirely on her daughter, lifting her easily from Brandon's arms. The baby immediately nestled into the crook of her neck, sighing with relief. The bond between them was palpable, an invisible fortress that Brandon was locked out of. "She looks good," Brandon said, his voice cracking. He felt small in her presence. You look good, Viv." Vivian finally looked at him. Her eyes swept over his frayed collar, his tired eyes, his slumped shoulders. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, not hate, but a distant, detached pity. It was the way one might look at a stray dog in the rain. "She is good, Brandon. She's happy. She's loved. Does she know who I am?" Brandon asked the question, tearing out of his throat. "Does she know I'm her father?" Vivian paused, adjusting the baby's blanket. She looked at the child, then back at the man who had once promised to protect them both. "She knows you are her father," Vivian said softly. "But being a dad, that is something you have to earn. And right now you are just a visitor." She turned to leave the nanny following close behind. Panic seized Brandon. This was it. Another week of silence. Another week of Greece and loneliness. "Vivian!" he called out, desperation making his voice shrill. She stopped in the doorway, her back to him. "Do you ever miss me?" Brandon asked, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. "We had 5 years, Viv. Do you ever miss us, even a little?" Vivian stood silent for a long moment. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Finally, she turned her head slightly, looking at him over her shoulder. "I miss the man I thought you were," she said, her voice steady and final. "But I don't miss you, Brandon, because that man never existed. You were just a character you played until the money ran out." She didn't wait for a response. She walked out the door, the click of her heels echoing down the hallway, fading away into a life that was vibrant, full, and completely free of him. Brandon stood alone in the silence of the grey room. He had wanted to be a king. He had wanted a trophy on his arm. He had mocked the woman who built his world, thinking he could stand taller without her support. He looked down at his empty hands. He had exactly what he had asked for his freedom, and it was the heaviest thing he had ever carried. As he walked out into the biting cold night to catch his bus back to the bowling alley, he saw a massive digital billboard illuminating the street corner. It was an advertisement for NextCore Solutions. The slogan, written in bold, unforgiving letters, seemed to mock him directly. "True value isn't what you show, it's what you build." Brandon pulled his thin, inadequate coat tighter around himself, lowered his head against the wind, and disappeared into the crowd, just another shadow in the city. A man who had held a diamond in his hand and traded it for a rock. Brandon learned the hard way that arrogance is a loan you eventually have to pay back with interest. He treated his wife like an accessory, failing to realize she was the entire foundation of his life. He chased the cheap glitter of a mistress and the illusion of status, only to lose the solid gold of a loyal partner and a loving family. In the end, Vivian didn't just win in court. She won in life. She proved that the best revenge isn't screaming, fighting, or sinking to their level. It's simply succeeding without the people who held you back. She turned her pain into an empire, while Brandon was left with the ashes of his own ego. If this story hit home for you, or if you believe that character is more valuable than currency, hit that like button right now. It helps the channel so much. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. What would you have done in Vivian's shoes? Would you have given him a second chance, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.